The sterile hum of the server room was my sanctuary, a symphony of cooling fans and whirring drives that always drowned out the world. For 5 years, it had been my haven, the place where I translated the chaotic language of the global market into the elegant logic of code. It was the birthplace of Chimera. On paper, my title was Senior Data Architect at Innovate Strategic. In reality, I was a ghostwriter for a man who couldn't write a single line of code, but took all the credit for the poetry it produced. That man was Lysander Price, my boss, the celebrated visionary whose face graced the covers of tech magazines. The man who once called me his secret weapon, and later simply called me expendable. 3 months ago, that word became my reality in a boardroom so cold it felt like a mausoleum. Lysander stood at the head of a polished mahogany table that reflected his expensive suit like a dark, distorted mirror. His smile radiated a practiced charm that could melt glaciers, or in my case, incinerate a 5-year dream. Across from him sat the titans of Ethelred Capital, their faces impassive, like stoic gods contemplating the fate of mortal empires. I sat to Lysander's left, a ghost at my own creation's unveiling. This was supposed to be my triumph. I remembered the year before on a smaller project, a predictive model for commodity futures. I did all the work, found the alpha, built the engine. In the final presentation, Lysander had me sit in the back while he explained his methodology using my slides, occasionally glancing back at me as if I were a prompter in case he forgot his lines. He never did. He was a master of performance. I had vowed after that Chimera would be different. I would not be a footnote. We've been working on something truly extraordinary, Lysander began, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that commanded attention. A predictive model, capable of identifying systemic risks with an accuracy that will redefine the industry. A true game-changer for market stability. He gestured towards me, a perfunctory flick of his wrist. It was the same gesture he used to summon a waiter. Calliope Ellis, our lead architect, will walk you through the technical intricacies. I took a shaky breath, my heart thrumming against my ribs with a mixture of immense pride and a deep, gnawing trepidation. Chimera wasn't just a model. It was my answer to the chaos I saw in the world. I'd been a graduate student during the 2008 financial crisis, watching from the sidelines as complex derivatives, treated like casino chips, brought the global economy to its knees. I saw the human cost, the families who lost everything because of unchecked greed in systems no one truly understood. Chimera was my attempt to build a shield. It was a sophisticated AI, built on quantum principles, designed to sift through the deafening noise of global markets and pinpoint those elusive black swans, the unpredictable, catastrophic events that could wipe out fortunes, pensions, and lives overnight. It was meant to be a warning bell, not a cash register. I launched into my explanation, the nervousness melting away as I spoke the language I loved. I detailed the algorithms, the multi-layered neural networks, the quantum entanglement simulations that allowed Chimera to see relationships in data that were invisible to the human eye. I spoke of probabilities, of risk mitigation, of the ethical guardrails I had painstakingly coded into its core to prevent it from being used for predatory short-selling. I described how Chimera would help investors make smarter, safer decisions, protecting the entire ecosystem from another 2008. My voice gained momentum, fueled by a passion that had been my constant companion through countless sleepless nights. This was my moment, but as I spoke, I watched Lysander's expression shift. The charming smile tightened at the corners, his eyes narrowing into slits. He wasn't listening to the science, he was calculating the profit margins. My meticulous explanation of ethical AI, of risk avoidance, was clearly not the sales pitch he wanted to hear. The men from Ethelred were not philanthropists, they were predators, and Lysander was offering them sharper teeth. When I finished, a heavy hush fell over the room. Lysander waited a beat, letting my words evaporate in the cold air, then he stepped forward, placing a hand on my shoulder. It felt less like a gesture of support and more like an owner claiming property. Calliope's work is brilliant, truly, he said, his voice now laced with a subtle, patronizing warmth. However, he paused, letting the word hang like an executioner's blade, her approach is, shall we say, overly cautious. The ethical implications she speaks of are, frankly, a hindrance to profitability. The system, as it stands, is a finely tuned instrument of observation. I intend to turn it into an instrument of action. He looked directly at the Ethelred executives, his gaze steady and confident. I believe the real breakthrough lies not in avoiding risk, but in mastering it, in harnessing this power for more proactive strategies, for aggressive market positioning. He gave my shoulder a final, crushing squeeze. We will be moving forward with Chimera, but under a revised framework, one that prioritizes decisive action over theoretical safety, a framework I will personally oversee. My blood ran cold. He wasn't revising it, he was perverting it. He was turning my shield into a sword. The very tool I designed to prevent another financial catastrophe was about to be used to trigger them for profit. The rest of the meeting was a blur of jargon and dollar signs. Lysander spoke about his revised framework, about strategic market dominance, and about how he would personally lead the next phase. My name was mentioned only once more, as he casually announced my departure from Innovate Strategic, citing irreconcilable differences in strategic direction, and my perceived limitations in understanding the aggressive applications of advanced AI. He made it sound like I was being gently retired, a brilliant but naive mind unsuited for the real world. The walk back to my desk was the longest of my life. The HR director was already there, a manila folder in her hand, her expression a mask of corporate sympathy. I was given 15 minutes to pack my personal effects. As I placed my notebooks and a small framed photo into a cardboard box, I could feel the eyes of my colleagues on me. Some looked away, ashamed. Others watched with a cold curiosity. I was no longer a colleague. I was a cautionary tale. Expelled from my own sanctuary, my life's work stolen and twisted, I walked out of that building feeling like a hollowed-out shell. But as I sat in the sterile silence of my apartment, the initial shock subsided, replaced by a cold, hard resolve that solidified like ice in my veins. Lysander Price had made a grave mistake. He thought he was burying Calliope Ellis and her dangerously idealistic AI. He didn't realize he was just giving me the space and the motive to show him what Chimera could really do. He wanted to play God with my creation. Fine, I would arrange the meeting. He had built his empire on stolen ideas and manipulation. Now, it was time to use my mind, the very thing he'd tried to discard, to dismantle everything he'd built. My plan began to form, not out of rage, but out of a deep, chilling logic. I knew Lysander. He was arrogant, but he wasn't a fool. He couldn't replicate the quantum core of Chimera. He would use the existing architecture, but he would try to force it to bend it to his will. That would be his undoing. Because in my desperation to protect Chimera from a man exactly like Lysander, I had built in a final, secret failsafe. A hidden protocol, a small piece of my own conscience embedded deep in the code. It wasn't a virus. It was a truth serum. I called it the Oracle's Rebuke. It was designed to activate only when the system was tasked with generating a high-probability, high-impact prediction based on parameters that were clearly manipulative and predatory. It wouldn't crash the system. It wouldn't destroy the data. It would do something far worse for a man like Lysander. It would make him look like a fool. It would expose the lie. My plan was simple. Let him have his moment in the sun. Let him try to sell his perverted version of my dream. I would just be there in the digital shadows, waiting for him to step into the light. The days following my termination were a blur of frantic activity, fueled by a potent cocktail of cold fury and an even colder sense of clarity. Lysander Price thought he had won. He stripped me of my job, my reputation, and my creation, all within the span of a single, brutal board meeting. But he had forgotten one crucial detail. A ghost can walk through walls, and in the digital world, I was about to become his phantom. My first move wasn't to rage, but to meticulously lay the groundwork for his self-destruction. The Oracle's Rebuke was the weapon, but a weapon is useless without intelligence. I needed a man on the inside. My mind immediately went to Eris, a junior programmer who had worked on Chimera's user interface. He was quiet, brilliant, and possessed a deep, almost reverent respect for the project's complexity, and for me, its architect. Unlike the sycophants who orbited Lysander, Eris saw the work, not the performance. I met him at a noisy, anonymous coffee shop miles from the financial district. He looked nervous, clutching his coffee cup like a shield. "Eris, I need your help," I said, keeping my voice low and even, betraying none of the turmoil churning inside me. "Lysander is preparing a live demonstration of Chimera for Ethelred Capital. He's going to show them his revised framework. He thinks he's stolen it. He's wrong." Eris's eyes darted around the room. "Ms. Ellis, Calliope, are you sure about this? Lysander is on a warpath. He's telling everyone you had a breakdown, that your code was unstable. He's purging the team of anyone loyal to you. He's dangerous." "He's not dangerous, Eris. He's desperate," I countered, leaning forward. "He lost millions for the firm last quarter on a bad bet in the derivatives market. Chimera isn't just a project for him, it's his only lifeline. He can't replicate the quantum core, and he knows it. He's going to try and force the existing model to give him the answers he wants. I need to see it happen. I need a secure, anonymous link to the live demonstration. And I need any internal documentation you can find on his so-called framework. He hesitated, the fear warring with the anger in his eyes. He's running simulations constantly. The projections he's sending to Ethelred, they're insane. He's modeling scenarios that would bankrupt entire sectors, all for a quick profit. It's not just aggressive, it's predatory. He took a deep breath. He's erasing you. Your name has been scrubbed from every line of documentation, every file. He's even renaming the project. He's calling it Price's Titan. The name was so ridiculously egotistical it was almost funny. But the rest of it confirmed my worst fears. This wasn't just theft, it was a desecration. My shield was being reforged into a guillotine. That's why you have to help me, Eris. This isn't just about my career anymore. It's about what he's going to unleash. Over the next week, Eris became my reluctant co-conspirator. We communicated through encrypted channels, a digital ballet of cat and mouse. He sent me snippets of Lysander's internal memos, detailing a plan to use Chimera to predict a microcrash in the biotech sector, allowing Ethelred to short the stocks moments before and buy them back for pennies on the dollar. He sent me the revised presentation slides, sanitized for public consumption, but dripping with the language of conquest and domination. He even managed to extract fragments of the manipulated code Lysander's new team was clumsily trying to implement. It was amateurish, a brute force attempt to shackle a thoroughbred. They were treating a quantum computer like a pocket calculator. The more I saw, the colder my resolve became. This wasn't just business, it was a moral abomination. I spent my days meticulously documenting everything Eris sent, building a timeline of evidence. I also began reaching out, laying the second part of my trap. I contacted a well-respected financial journalist, a woman named Imogen Vane, known for her incisive takedowns of corporate corruption. I fed her information anonymously, piece by piece, background on Innovate Strategic's recent losses, whispers of a revolutionary but unstable new AI, hints of a coming demonstration that would change everything. I wasn't giving her the story, I was giving her the ingredients. She would be ready to cook the moment the oven was hot. The night before the demonstration, Eris sent me a frantic message. He's going all in. He convinced Ethelred to let him run the simulation on a live, sandboxed portion of their actual portfolio. It's not just a demo anymore. It's a proof of concept with real money on the line. If it works, they're signing the deal. If it fails, Calliope, he's fired the last 2 members of the original analytics team. He says it's restructuring. He's eliminating witnesses. My heart pounded in my chest. The stakes had just been raised exponentially. This wasn't just about my reputation anymore. It was about Eris's job, about the livelihoods of our former colleagues, and about the integrity of the market itself. The day of the presentation arrived. The city was gray and overcast, a perfect reflection of my mood. I found a quiet corner in a small library with public Wi-Fi, a digital ghost in a house of paper. I opened my laptop, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. One screen showed the secure video feed Eris had provided. The other showed a direct, hidden diagnostic link to Chimera's core. On the video feed, Lysander was in his element. He stood before the Ethelred executives, a picture of confident power. "Good morning, esteemed members of Ethelred Capital," he began, his voice smooth as polished marble. "Today, we move beyond theory and into practice. Today, we unveil not just an AI, but a new paradigm of financial strategy. We have harnessed its predictive power, moving beyond mere risk mitigation to active market domination." My gaze flickered to the diagnostic screen. I could see the data streams. Lysander was feeding Chimera carefully selected, biased information, trying to force it toward a specific conclusion about the biotech sector. He was poisoning the well. He continued his performance, his words painting a picture of unparalleled financial acumen. "Our new framework, which I have personally developed, allows us to anticipate market volatility with astonishing precision. We can identify points of inflection, leverage emerging trends, and capitalize on predictable downturns." He smiled, a shark's grin. "Imagine knowing, with certainty, when to sell high and buy low. Imagine turning potential disasters into unprecedented profit. Now let's see Price's Titan in action." My fingers flew across the keyboard. This was the moment. The Oracle's rebuke wasn't an attack I needed to launch. It was a defense mechanism I simply needed to unlock. It was part of Chimera's original code, my ethical failsafe. Lysander's manipulative queries were the key. He was turning the key in the lock himself. I just had to make sure the door opened. He instructed the system to run the final simulation on Ethelred's live portfolio. Titan, identify the highest probability negative impact event within the next 24-hour market cycle, he commanded, his voice filled with theatrical gravitas. On the large screen in the boardroom, the data began to churn. Complex charts and graphs swirled into a vortex of information. The Ethelred executives leaned forward, their faces tense with anticipation. Lysander puffed out his chest, ready to receive his crown. My diagnostic screen lit up with a single line of text: Ethical Parameter Breach DETACTED. Oracle Protocol ACTIVATED. On the boardroom screen, the complex charts vanished. They were replaced by a single, stark sentence displayed in clean, bold text. Analysis complete. Highest probability event. An acute global shortage of artisanal coffee beans, triggered by a viral TikTok trend, will cause a 90% collapse in the tech sector as productivity plummets. Recommend immediate liquidation of all tech assets and reinvestment in South American coffee futures. A profound, deafening silence fell over the room. The Ethelred executives stared at the screen, their expressions a mixture of utter confusion and dawning horror. Lysander's confident smile froze, then melted from his face. He squinted, his jaw slackening. What is this?" he stammered, his voice losing its polished edge. He frantically typed at his console. This is a glitch, a minor data anomaly. The system is recalibrating, but the damage was done." The screen was a monument to his failure. It was so specific, so contemporary, so utterly ridiculous that it couldn't be a glitch. It was a joke, and he was the punchline. One of the Ethelred partners slowly stood up, his face a mask of cold fury. "Mr. Price," he said, his voice dripping with ice, "this meeting is over." As chaos erupted in the boardroom, I typed one final, anonymous message to Imogen Vane: "The Titan has spoken. Check your sources." I closed my laptop, the adrenaline beginning to fade, replaced by a deep, weary sense of finality. The Oracle's rebuke had worked perfectly. Lysander's arrogance had been his undoing. He had tried to force my creation to lie for him, and in response, it had told the most absurd truth of all: that he was a fool. The journalist's article, published less than an hour later, would not be an expose. It would be an obituary for the career of Lysander Price. The immediate aftermath of Lysander's spectacular implosion was a digital wildfire. Imogen Vane's article, titled "Price's Titan Falls: How Hubris and a TikTok Trend Toppled a Wall Street AI," went viral. The story was merciless, detailing Lysander's recent financial blunders, the suspicious timing of my departure, and culminating in the now infamous artisanal coffee crisis prediction. The sheer absurdity of the event made it irresistible. It wasn't just a corporate failure, it was a meme. Lysander Price's name was plastered everywhere, not as a visionary, but as a cautionary tale, a charlatan undone by his own ambition. The fallout for Innovate Strategic was catastrophic. Ethelred Capital, incandescent with rage at being publicly humiliated, not only pulled their potential investment, but also announced their own internal investigation into the firm's practices, a clear threat of a massive lawsuit. The company's stock, built on the fragile foundation of Lysander's manufactured brilliance, plummeted. The board, scrambling to contain the damage, fired Lysander immediately, his termination announced in a terse press release that was a masterpiece of corporate doublespeak. I watched it all unfold from the quiet of my apartment, a silent observer of the storm I had unleashed. I hadn't crashed a market, I had merely held up a mirror, and the world had finally seen the distorted reflection of the man behind the curtain. My oracle's rebuke hadn't caused financial chaos, it had exposed the man who was actively trying to create it. The legal ramifications for Lysander were swift and brutal. Facing lawsuits from Ethelred and a shareholder revolt, he became a pariah. My own legal team, armed with the mountain of evidence Eris and I had compiled, the internal emails, the altered code fragments, my meticulously documented development logs, and the sworn testimony of two other engineers Lysander had fired, filed a lawsuit against Innovate Strategic. It wasn't about the money. It was about reclaiming my name and the soul of my creation. It was about justice. The legal battle was an exhausting trench war. Lysander's lawyers tried to paint me as a disgruntled, unstable employee who had sabotaged the system out of spite. But their narrative crumbled under the weight of hard evidence. The moment my lawyer presented the original, heavily annotated source code of Chimera, complete with date-stamped comments outlining the purpose of the ethical guardrails, next to the clumsy, brute force code Lysander's team had tried to implement, the case was effectively over. The code told the story. It was a digital fingerprint of his intent. The verdict was a resounding victory. Innovate Strategic was ordered to pay a significant settlement for wrongful termination and intellectual property theft. More importantly, the court granted a full and complete injunction. All ownership of the Chimera Protocol, including all associated patents and intellectual property rights, was legally transferred to me. Lysander Price, stripped of his golden parachute by the fraud allegations and facing his own legal battles, vanished from the public eye. He had tried to steal a future and ended up with no future at all. But as I stood on the courthouse steps, the victory felt hollow. The burning fire of retribution had cooled, leaving behind a fine layer of ash. The fight had consumed me for months. It had been my singular focus, my reason for getting up in the morning. Now that it was over, I felt a profound weariness settle deep into my bones. I had won, but the process had cost me something I couldn't quantify. I had proven that integrity mattered, but I was left grappling with the deep cynicism the betrayal had carved into me. The first few months were a quiet rebuilding. I used a portion of the settlement to found a new company, a small startup with a simple, powerful mission. On the frosted glass of our modest office door, the name read, Ellis Ethics AI for a Better Future. Eris, my loyal co-conspirator, was my first employee and chief technology officer. We started small, fielding inquiries not from the predatory sharks Lysander had courted, but from organizations that genuinely wanted to leverage AI for good. Nonprofits working on climate change models, ethical investment funds, and university research bodies. Yet even as we began to build something new and positive, a part of me remained adrift. The drive for revenge had been a powerful engine, but without it, I felt a strange emptiness. I had proven Lysander wrong, but I hadn't yet proven to myself that I could move on. One quiet afternoon, as we were unpacking the last of the boxes in our new office, Eris approached me, a hesitant smile on his face. Calliope, he began, I wanted to give you this. He held out a small, worn leather-bound journal. It's your old research journal, from when you first started working on Chimera. I found it in a box of your old things the company had stored away. I thought you might want it back. I took the journal, my fingers tracing the faded, embossed title, Chimera Protocol, Seeds of Insight. Opening it, I was hit by the scent of old paper and ink. I saw my own handwriting, messier, more excited, full of diagrams, half-formed equations, and philosophical questions about the nature of prediction. I saw the notes I'd written after watching a documentary about the 2008 crash, the very notes that sparked the idea for the project. I read a passage I had underlined twice. A tool is not inherently good or evil. Its morality is defined by the intent of its creator. Purpose must be coded into its heart. Tears welled in my eyes, but they were not tears of anger or sadness. They were tears of release. This journal, this tangible link to my original purpose, was a powerful reminder. Lysander Price had tried to corrupt Chimera, but he could never touch its genesis, the pure intent behind its creation. The fight for justice had been a necessary catalyst, a cleansing fire, but it wasn't the destination. The true path forward lay in rebuilding, not on the ashes of vengeance, but on the foundation of the principles I had held dear from the very beginning. I closed the journal, a sense of peace settling over me for the first time in months. The anger had finally faded, replaced by a quiet, determined strength. Lysander had sought to weaponize knowledge. I would use it to empower. He had built a future on deceit. I would build mine on transparency and ethical application. My journey wasn't about tearing him down. It was about building myself up, and in doing so, creating something that could genuinely make a difference. The scars of his betrayal would always be a part of my story, a reminder of the fragility of trust, but they would no longer define my future. My sanctuary was no longer a server room. It was this small office, this new beginning, this possibility of a future where innovation served humanity, not the other way around. And that, I realized, was a victory far greater than any courtroom verdict. The path to healing wasn't about destroying the past, but about building a better future, one ethical algorithm at a time.